We start off tonight with a story about the weather in Europe, and I will tell you why it is that you should care about this. The headlines say that Britain is melting and that it's the hottest day ever in many cities across Europe. True, it's really hot here in Palm Beach, too, I can tell you. Of course, the wacky environmentalist left tells us that all of this means that this is climate change that they've been warning about for over 50 years, and that it's finally here. It was global warming, it was global cooling, and then they decided to make it climate change because it fits better in their narrative and they didn't have to become hypocrites all the time. Anyway, to them, this is the apocalypse finally that they've been warning about for decades and decades. The left and the corporate media say that this heat wave is just a warning of what will happen if we don't act now. Basically eradicate the planet of these pesky little things called humans. Of course, when we point out that record cold days happen during the winter, the left says that the weather has nothing to do with the climate. They say a few cold days mean absolutely nothing. But when there are a few hot days, that means the world is ending, and our government overlords are the only ones who can fix it, and all we have to do is whatever they say. And make no mistake, climate lockdowns are coming. Climate lockdowns, you heard me correctly, are coming. Remember COVID? How about when they decide randomly that we have a climate emergency and they lock you down for it? If you doubt that, then you've already forgotten what happened over the past few years. But let's look back and see how wrong they are and how wrong they've been for so many decades. The Boston Globe in 1970 reported that air pollution will cause an ice age to hit by the year 2000. One of my favorites is this article from 34 years ago saying that the Maldives Islands will be underwater within 30 years because sea levels will rise from global warming and melting ice caps. And the so-called experts also predicted that the islands would be uninhabitable by 1992 anyway, because the supply of drinking water on the islands would be gone. But alas, they're still here. How about that? In 1989, the Associated Press reported that rising seas would obliterate entire nations by the year 2000. And today, one of my favorite Twitter accounts, Junk Science, tweeted a news story from the New York Herald from 101 years ago. This was in 1921, folks. The article warns about the millions facing certain death due to record-breaking heat waves. Guess where? Across Europe. So, was that man-made global warming too? 101 years ago? Is anybody ready to admit this is absolutely a bunch of bunk, motivated by a will to change up our planet and to give us one world government under the UN? The man behind the Junk Science Twitter account who posted that 101-year-old article is Steve Malloy, and he joins us right now. Steve, you're like salve to the soul, honest to God. Like, we need you so badly just to spell out what we know is true, because the climate crazies have never been right, but they continue to cry wolf season after season, weather event after weather event. If we were having hurricanes this season like we have in other seasons in Florida, they'd be blaming that on climate. If we were having record cool temperatures, Steve, they'd be blaming that on climate problems too, would they not?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Dr. Gina. Look, it's never waste a crisis. Yeah, it's hot, very hot in Europe today, and it's very hot in the Midwest, in the U.S. Midwest today. But guess what? It's cooler in Africa and Eastern Europe and Asia. And if you look at the whole globe, the con is called global warming after all. We're less than a half degree warmer today than the 1979 to 2000 average. And that's despite all the greenhouse gas emissions and all the horrible things that they predicted that never happened. So there's really not much, global warming going on today. Yeah, it's hot in Europe, but it's cool elsewhere. And you don't see that reported in the media at all.
Yeah, and someone pointed out, it could have even been you and just me perusing all the total BS about this, frankly. Sorry, I don't use that word very often, but I got to use it here. That they've changed on the weather maps. The hot areas on the weather maps used to be reflected in yellow, but now they're red. They changed the color on the weather maps. You can't make this stuff up, Steve.
Well, it's all part of their psychological ploys. I mean, look, these are communists, and they work on our psyches. And they're destroying children's minds. They've destroyed the educational curriculum. They've captured every institution. They are at total war with the rest of us. They are bent, as you sort of alluded to this earlier, they are bent on controlling us. And one of the ways they're trying to do that, COVID, they tried COVID, had a lot of success with it, but climate is really the big game because through climate and energy and the economy, you control everything. So they've got to scare enough people quick enough so that they can grab power. But you know what? The whole thing is really kind of melting down. Just recently, the New York Times had a poll, amid all the insanity going on in the world today, the energy crisis, the war in Ukraine, everything else that's going on, only 1% in a New York Times poll, only 1% of voters prioritize climate. 0% in the 45 to 64 age group, 0% among Latinos, 0% among Republicans, 1% among everybody else. I mean, it's really something.
But as they try, Steve, to connect the crises, right? They try to say that, that the invasion on the border is actually just a symptom of climate change because so many people need to migrate to the U.S. illegally because their climates are having problems, food shortages, whatever. As the government continues to exacerbate food shortages, to destroy and take over small farms, to take away land for national reserves. The list goes on and on, to mess with our water and all the rest of the things. Then they continue to blame all of this on climate. So it worries me, Steve, that the sheeple of this world will fall for the things they're doing to exacerbate problems that they can then blame on climate, because if climate becomes the reason why we have inflation, the reason why gas prices are high, right, the reason why we have an invasion of millions of people on our southern border, then people might start to care if they fall for that lie. How do we, as people who actually have brains and can think and can do math and understand science well enough to know they're lying, how do we battle back at that effort?
Well, you've already taken the first step. You follow me on Twitter, so I mean, look, it's my job. There's a bunch of people like me that try to debunk this stuff as we go along. And not only do we debunk the facts, we debunk the motivations. Joe Biden is not out there trying to make gasoline prices cheaper. He's not actually trying to control inflation, because what Democrats want is to wreck our society. And why do they want to wreck our society? They want to wreck it because out of that wreckage and out of that chaos, what do people do? They hunger for more government control. And that's exactly what they want. And they are going to wreck our society. This is their MO. This started out with the Russian Revolution. They did the same thing. Now they're doing it to us. And, they do it climate, education, the border. They just want to cause chaos. Look, they're not out there solving problems. Name me one problem Joe Biden is trying to solve. Everything he's done is to make gas prices higher, which he knows feeds inflation. It's all intentional.
Yeah. Steve, Senator Joe Manchin threw a big wrench into the plans of the radical left when he said he's not going to go along with the climate crazy that the radical left had hoped to ram through before midterms. What exactly did Joe Manchin save us from, if you can analyze?
Well, Joe Manchin has saved us twice from this Build Back Better monstrosity of Biden's. Last year, the Build Back Better included this provision to basically federalize the electricity grid, through which Joe Biden hoped to, meet his goal of cutting our emissions in half by 2030 per the Paris Climate Accord. Joe Biden drew the line there because Joe Biden, look, is from West Virginia. West Virginia depends on coal and natural gas, as the rest of our economy does. So this year, so they gave up on trying to control the electricity grid, and they put in, hundreds of billions of dollars for green energy subsidies, windmills and solar panels and electric cars. And Joe Biden just said, look, we've got too much inflation. We can't afford this nonsense. And I think, Joe Manchin has a good sense of what's going on with climate. And, as it's turned out, he is the Democrat John McCain.